Welcome everyone to the second virtual workshop of the Raynham Master Plan. As this first slide says, we're going to be covering topics of land use, housing, and economic development today. Before we get started, I think we're going to go into a couple virtual meeting reminders. As Jed mentioned earlier, while we are here in the meeting, if we could all remain muted until you have a question or comment, at which point, please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat feature. As a reminder to everyone, we are recording this meeting, so that's for our benefit and for yours, so we can all look back and see what comments were said, and make sure we capture everything as accurately as possible. And just so you know, staff will be monitoring the chat, as well as making sure that things are remain appropriate in case there's any Zoom bombing. We will stop the meeting and just resume within another 5 minutes. And in case of any disruptions, we'll be sure to remove those, just that way everything runs as smoothly as possible. So without further ado, just to give you a layout of the evening today, we'll do a few welcome and introductions, and we're kind of already there. And then we'll do some just basic master plan overview. What is it? Why are we here? And what will we be talking about today? And then we'll dive right into those topics of land use, housing, and economic development. And we'll do a demonstration of the exercise that's really meant to be interactive and a way to gather your input and your thoughts about Raynham's future. So who is SERPED and who are we? SERPED is a regional planning agency for Southeastern Mass. In regards to the master plan, we're here to listen to you and really conduct outreach for the town, meet with its residents, visitors, business owners. We're really here to cover everything. And in addition to speaking with you, we take a look at data and information and present it in the best possible way that's easy to relate to and understand. And from these two important elements, we take that information and with your assistance, establish goals and priorities and create a plan to get there. And that's really what the master plan is. And you'll see there our contact info and names. So my name is Lizeth Gonzalez, in case I haven't introduced myself yet. And Jed, as you can see on the camera there as well, he is a co-lead on the master plan as well. So we've been doing a lot of work together these past few months. So as I mentioned earlier, we're on the second workshop of the master plan. The first workshop took place in early summer, and that was really a broad view of Raynham, where we are at, where we've been, and how we want to move forward in all areas. Today, we're going to take a deeper dive and a closer look into these three topics. And as we move forward in the master plan process, we'll touch on the various different elements of the master plan, as you can see there. And the very last workshop is a chance to see the draft of the plan as a whole. So that way there's a chance for you to submit comments, what we missed during this whole process, and what can change in time for final submission and approval. Importantly for a master plan is obviously speaking to the public, getting your input, and a part of that, not only because of COVID, we've decided to focus in on various ways to gather input, and that includes the webpage, a survey that's ongoing, as well as a comment card. I do want to point out that the survey and the comment card are digital, so you can go to our website and click on a link and immediately access them, but there's also the option to download a PDF and send it directly to us, to our email, which is listed right there. And as a part of the master plan, we've created a listening line that you can call or text. And these are some takeaways that we've gathered. During the first discovery workshop, as I mentioned, we took a broad view of all topics in Raynham. And these were some of the most highlighted ones, the most talked about, and the ones that seemed to resonate most with those attendees at that meeting. And as a part of that, I wanted to highlight the three that we talked about that relate to today's topics. And that's managing future growth, how to maintain that small town character, and maybe enhance those walkable networks, how we want to move forward with creating housing for our aging populations, and supporting the local economy with the types of businesses that we want to see in town. And without further ado, I think I'm going to hand it off to Jed.
Thank you, Lizette.
Sorry.
Again, just want to express my thank you to everyone who joined this evening. Lizette probably mentioned this as I was monitoring the chat and the attendees list, that we want to try to keep this as brief as possible, but informative, because we want to take too much of your time, but we want to get good feedback tonight. So I'm going to briefly go over these four main topics: the idea of current land use, what is known to be your priority areas, housing, and importantly, zoning. So we'll do sort of 2 slides per topic, give you a sort of a 30,000-foot view, and then we'll sort of zoom in a little bit, talk a little bit about some of the takeaways that we have, and then we'll, go to that interactive exercise and open up a casual conversation. Next slide. Hopefully Lizette can hear me. Can you advance? I think we have a frozen computer. Okay. Oh. Why don't I do this? I'll share my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, I'm going to back up just a little. Oh. Okay, so start from the top. What is land use, right? So the idea of land use is basically this map is showing how the land is currently being used in town. And so on the right-hand side, as you can see on the bar or the pie chart, your predominant land use in town is your single family or your residence. And up in the legend, you can see that the yellow, the very light yellow, is residents that are less than or equal to 3 units. So it's typically your single family, 2 family, and 3 family developments. As that shade of yellow sort of darkens, so does the density. So your apartments are, a darker shade of orange, and then your mixed use is typically shown.
Excuse me, Jed. Jed,
yeah?
we're not seeing the chart that you're talking about.
Okay.
We're seeing a chart that says Raynham now zoning and vacant parcels, and it has north, middle, and east. There's no pie chart or anything of that nature.
Let me try sharing my screen again so we get this right. How about now? What do you see now? Still the same?
I think we got the one you're talking about now. We're all set now.
Awesome. Yay, technology. Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen is what I was just describing is your current land use. The legend up here indicates the type of land use, and this is taken from your current assessor's records. So as I mentioned, your residences are your lighter yellows. As it darkens, the density increases. Your commercial and office are typically shown in red and pink. And then industrial is shown in purple and institutional in blue. So those are your main categories. So a lot of folks, have a question when it comes to institutional. Well, what does that mean? Those are land uses basically that the property owner doesn't pay taxes. So they're tax exempt. So those could be owned by the town. It could be owned by the state. Could be typical or other conservation type agencies or charitable or religious entities. So those are, as I mentioned, they don't typically pay taxes. We would group all those together is what's known as institutional land use. So as you look at the pie chart on the right-hand side, you can see that the predominant land use in Raynham is your residents, which are less than or equal to 3 units, followed closely by vacant land. So in this conversation, vacant land basically shows land that does not have a structure. because again, this is all about the use of the land. So typically a commercial use would have a commercial store. So this is just showing land that does not have a structure. There's a lot of parcel information in the town which just generally doesn't have any data. And so we're trying to get to the bottom of what those include, but you can see that on the pie chart as a white section of the pie. And importantly, as you can see up on the map, there's an awful lot of institutional land in Raynham, and then the remainder of it, as you can see on the pie chart, is industrial, commercial, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is we're going to sort of hone in a little bit on 3 areas of town. So you saw those 4 main maps. So it was land use, priority areas, so on and so forth. What we did is we cut the town into 3 sections so we could talk about it in more detail. So what we saw in North Raynham is a lot of combination of uses, if you will, along 138, all surrounded by that residence use. In the center of town, what really pops off the map there is a lot of the blue, the institutional land use that we talked about before. And then on the eastern side, and I'm sure you can see the division here. So the northern section is 495 north to the eastern town line. The middle is essentially the western part of town cut at Route 24. And then the eastern is from Route 24 to the east side of town, which is Middleborough and Bridgewater. So on the eastern side, there's a lot of what considered in this conversation as vacant land. So land that does not currently have a structure. Now there's a lot of wetland in that area as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But then, another thing that really popped off the map here was the land uses along 44. So you have a lot of industrial, office, and commercial uses along that corridor. Then we'll talk about priority areas. So for those of you who don't know what these are, back in 2008, as part of the South Coast Rail planning effort, the Commonwealth encouraged municipalities within the South Coast Rail study area to identify development and protection areas. And what does that mean? That basically means is where do you want to see development happen, and where would you rather see preservation of land or protection of land? So in 2008, those areas were generally, just drawings on a map. It was very informal. 5 years later, there was more of a refinement effort, tie them to parcel lines, to perhaps open space areas, etc. And this is the result of that effort. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important for 2 reasons. One, the community has spoken about where those developments or where prime development land exists, or where they'd like to see development happen, and on the contrary, where they'd like to see protection happen, as well as when a community is pursuing grant funding, which is really important. It's one of the reasons why you would complete a master plan as well. A lot of times those grant applications ask questions related to this very effort and say, is the funding that you're requesting happen to be within perhaps a protection area or a development area? If the answer is yes, you get extra points. You're competing against other communities for that grant funding. So it's an effort to get the community to think ahead about where they want to see that type of protection or development. I will note on the map, you might see these 2 combined areas. So back in 2008 and even in 2013, where there wasn't agreement whether or not an area was to be purple or green, they simply made it a orangish yellow to indicate that there was a lack of consensus. One thing before I move on here, as you can see on the screen, there's the vast majority of land or areas in terms of priority area is for protection. You can see there it's 3,800 acres, as it compares to just over 650 acres for development. So just want to make that point. And then, as we zoom into these 3 areas, obviously in the north part of town, everyone knows about the former Raynham Park. That's a priority development site. The ACEC around it is identified as a protection area. In the middle part of town, it's an awful lot of wetland area, a few swamps. So you can see a lot of that green. But again, the purple areas along Broadway. So the area just south of I-495, as well as the area where the Walmart is currently. Those were indicated as priority development. And then on the eastern side, again, the whole idea of preservation really pops again. And then obviously the Raynham Woods Business Park. We'll note the Route 44 East, that area just on the Taunton River, clearly indicated as there was a lack of consensus on whether or not that should be development or protection. One could see development happening there because of, obviously the commercial character of Route 44. However, there's an awful lot of wetland in that area as well, and it abuts the river. So one can understand the lack of agreement, perhaps. Housing. So this map indicates or shows the types of housing within the community as it stands. This is also taken from your assessor's records. And the same as was indicated in the land use map, as the density increases, so does the color. So primarily what you see on this map is a lot of single family residential in town. And you can see on the map where there are places where you have perhaps residential condos or mobile homes. But on the right-hand side of the slide, you can clearly see that the predominant housing type is single-family residential. Let's zoom in really quickly. So the north side of town, the story that we see there is that, again, a lot of single-family residential. There is that one residential condo area. I believe that's called the Wildflower. I can't remember now. It's the Wildflower Gardens or Green, Wildflower Green, I believe it was called. In the center of town, and I will just pause here really quickly, but if you look from left to right, you can kind of see that slow progression of, there's a lot more density in terms of your housing types. You can see more of them as you move from left to right. So, obviously the 2 or 3, they're in the north section, there's more in the middle, and then on the eastern side of town, there's an awful lot of residential condo and mobile home. So in the middle, there's places like Chestnut Farms up in the northern end of town to orient yourself. This is the Housing Authority. And then this is the King Philip Street apartments. This is the Briar Cliff. And again, if I get these incorrectly, please someone, unmute yourself and correct me. You guys are the experts, town residents. And then on the eastern side of town, the Pine Hill Estates mobile home area. And then there's the apartments along Church Street. And then I believe this is Finch Farms. So it gives you a sense for where these are located. I will just note that you might see some of the mixed use categorization up in here. That's just typically, we looked into these parcels. It's typically a landowner who happens to have a single family home and an accessory use on the parcel. So it's not your typical, what you might think of as mixed use, which is, commercial on the first floor, apartments on the second floor of a building. So just want to make that clarification. And then the last map we'll talk about is zoning. And zoning is very important for those of you who know what zoning is and understand the complexities of zoning. It is what drives that first map, that land use map. It basically dictates what's allowed and what's not allowed on a piece of land. And so really quickly in Raynham, you have a number of different zoning districts. Right here, you can see you have 4 individual residential districts. Residence A is your single family residential. Residence B, C, and D all allow the single family use that was found in residential A. So all of those residential districts allow for single family. But in residential B, that's where you would find, I believe it's your multifamily developments as well as your cluster developments. Residential C also allows for mobile home. And residential D is where you would find, it's a version of mixed use. So commercial entities are allowed within structures in the residential D district, and that's located along Broadway here. And we'll get to that in just a second with that zoomed in map. Your farm and forest districts, those are your larger pieces of land. You need to have at least 5 acres in order to develop within those districts, and those are found on the map in green. And then your business district is shown in purple. That's predominantly along 138 and Route 44. And lastly, your industrial districts. Your first is located up in North Raynham, where the Raynham Park area is. And then your light industrial is located off of Pine Street on the very eastern side of town. So as part of going through the parcels and doing the analysis and uncovering statistics of the community, we also went through it and combed through all of your parcels to find the ones that basically are just vacant. And so, we talked about this previously in the land use conversation about what is a vacant land. Well, in land use, we talked about how it's vacant because it doesn't have a structure. That doesn't say that it's vacant and it can be developed. This assessment basically combed through all of those records to say, pull out the ones that perhaps had land conservation or had an abundance of wetlands, which would make it undevelopable. Also pulled out any exempt land, so land that was owned by some other tax exempt agency. So basically, what you're seeing here in those black outlines, so here in this area, and you can see them throughout each one of these maps, are basically vacant parcels, don't have a structure, that can be developed. And that's not to say that things are going to happen right away, and it's not to say that they definitely will be developed. But the point we tried to make here is that of all of these parcels, which I don't remember the exact number, it's only roughly just over 550 acres of land, as compared to the remainder of Raynham, which in total is roughly 11,300 acres. You're talking a very small percentage of the town, which is basically developable. And again, I want to stress to everyone on the meeting tonight that there may be some of these parcels that, because of other circumstances, perhaps it's just a lack of frontage or a flood zone that would preclude it from development. They're not necessarily going to happen, but it gives you perspective that a lot of what Raynham already has been developed. And I'm sure most of you probably already understand that, but we just wanted to show that in graphically for you. So in the northern section of town, very quickly, that's where you find that industrial areas, as I talked about on 138, and the business district that runs along that same route. In the center of town, the majority of it really is your Residence A. There's also a very large portion of farm and forest. That's essentially where you find the farm and forest district or districts, because there are 2 of them. And then in the eastern side of town, you can see it's clear that the business district and the development district along 44 predominates. And there's an awful lot of Residence A. That's also where you find your Residence D district. This is the mobile home allowable district. And then your light industrial, which is along Pine Street. So with that, I want to hand it over to Lizette, which I'm hoping is still on the call. Lizette, we lost you, I think, for a little bit.
Unfortunately, I'm back though.
Welcome back.
So thanks, Jed. I wanted to take a look at the survey results so far that we've received before we dive into some of the just open-ended questions and conversation starters that kind of lead us into the interactive map exercise. So in the survey, we've gotten a really great response to the survey, and we asked a couple questions related to land use, housing, and economic development. And when we asked people what types of changes they wanted to see in the future, many people said they wanted to see more recreational areas, in addition to open space and preservation designations. And to a lesser degree, but still important, many people expressed a desire to see more of a town center. We're unsure where that might be, but maybe you guys can help us decipher where that might be. And next slide. And another question we asked was, what might the top 3 economic development priorities be? And overwhelmingly, people said they wanted to attract and support small businesses. And to another degree, obviously a little bit less, enhance arts and culture amenities. And really importantly, I thought was striking was the low response that this idea of attracting big box stores had. I think we've heard it in some meeting or another, that people don't want to see that anymore. They're more interested in these small businesses, mom and pop, and that really comes out in this survey question. Next slide. And when we talk about housing, we think about who our population is, what's made up in that, what are the trends. So people overwhelmingly still want to see single family homes on relatively larger lots. There is interest in seeing those lots decrease a little bit, so we're increasing the density a little bit there. And there's also some interest in townhouses and duplexes. As a part of that, there's also a bit of an interest in assisted living facilities, and I think that touches a little bit on this idea of our growing senior population. So just some food for thought. And this is also an opportunity that if you haven't responded to the survey yet, it's a great opportunity to do so, and really give us your own take on these questions. But you can also tell us now. We'd also love to hear that as well. So next slide. And before we get into the interactive map, I just want to pose these general questions to you guys. Are there specific places in town that you want to see redevelopment? Is there specific non-residential growth you'd like to see somewhere? And again, talking about that town center, where is that? Where could that be? Is there a place that there's some type of consensus that people think would be an appropriate and ideal place for that? And touching on some of those maps that Jed showed us, are there any zoning changes you'd like to see? And what are your thoughts on those remaining vacant parcels? Because, we still have an opportunity to say what can and can't go there. Essentially, what land use and zoning is all about. So this is really an opportunity to talk about those things. So I'll open the floor to you guys.
So before we get going on that, we were going to just demonstrate that interactive map, and perhaps we can pull that up together. So while I still have sharing capability, I think, Lizette, what do you think? Do you want me to do the map for you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Just going to pull up the wiki map, and we can do the demonstration. Sounds like Lizette might be having audio issues tonight. Bear with me here while I pull it up. So while I'm pulling this up, is there anything that anyone can think of, that's burning on their minds that they would like to share with the group while we sort of get this started?
If I may, just a comment, Jed,
Sure.
John Texera here. Yeah, I'm surprised and interested in the amount of people talk about a town center. And I guess I pose the question to everyone in the meeting here today. I have a tough time visualizing where we would put a town center. I mean, we unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but we have the oddity of being surrounded by state highways. Neither one that I think lends itself to a town center. So everything, I think of a town center that's in the center of town and easily accessible. I don't see a place like that. Does anyone have any ideas on where something like that might go? And just one other thing before I leave it, just one note on the residential A that you mentioned before. There are some businesses that are allowed in residential A, as long as they don't exceed 2,000 square feet. You can put a barber shop, a doctor's office, that type of stuff, or whatever that's worth. That's my question. Where does anyone think or see a place for a town center?
So
Hi.
go ahead.
David LaPlante. One of the areas that I was thinking of, and it's in the very early stages, and really the only area in the center of town, is where the current police and fire station are. As you probably know, one of the things that we're working on is possibly building a new public safety building in the next few years, and that land would possibly be a spot for that.
Let me just make sure. Can everyone see my screen, which shows the map on the right-hand side and the questions on the left? Cool. All right. So I believe that, when we were talking at the discovery workshop, and David, I think this is your point. This was, if I've got this correct, this is the area which you were referring to. Right near where the library is and the current, although this says town hall, that's not accurate, the current fire department.
That's the area right there.
Okay. So I'm just going to demonstrate how we're going to take your comments tonight with that very thought, and how you can do this at home and encourage others to do it as well. It's very, very simple. And this map can be found on the workshop page, and we're going to be sending all that information out after tonight's meeting, thanking everybody for coming, instructions and whatnot. So it's really simple. Click on points. It depends on the type of comment that you want to leave. So if you want to leave something about a town center, perhaps that's a land use comment. You just simply click on the map, type in your comment. So this could be a great town center. And then click submit. You're done. Then afterwards, when you're going through this map, I'm just going to zoom out for a sec, you can go on to other people's comments. So for example, you can click on this comment here, and you can either agree with that comment, you can disagree, you can even leave your own comment on someone else's comment. All you have to do is just make sure that if you're clicking one of these, obviously you get to hit the button. If you leave your comment, just make sure that you click on add comment, and you're off and running. And you can go anywhere in town, and it's unlimited number of comments that you want to leave. If there are places that you really want to see preserved, or perhaps there's walking trail opportunities, or business growth that you'd rather see perhaps somewhere else in town, click the dot, put it on the map, leave a comment. Takes you 2 or 3 minutes, out the door. If you have any questions, we're here to help. So that's an example of how you put it in, and so we've put in our first. And so the remainder of tonight's meeting really is for an open, casual conversation, as we talked about before. Please let us know if there's areas in town that we can put the dot on the map for you. And Lizeth and I will be taking notes with any comments that you guys have this evening. So I'll open the floor.
I assume the comments I made at the last meeting about the area of the old dog track and the tank place is in here. Is that one of the points? There it is, that one there. That's it? Was that, you put it in for me last time?
Yes, we did. Yep.
Okay. And just one other comment, Dave, I agree, that would be the best place, but you know, I visualize a town center that not only has the police and fire, but also has the town hall as well. And in the space where the police and fire is right now, I don't know if that would accommodate all of them to make it a true center. But that physically, if you would, is the center of town. That's what everyone refers to. It's either referred to as the center of town or the stone church. I mean, that's the landmark, if you would.
Mhm.
But that would be the best place for it, but not a lot of room there.
No, there isn't enough room.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think the proposal on the new fire station and police station is over on King Philip Street, aside the Park and Rec department, if I remember correctly.
Up in here.
John, Gary Houghton, I like your question, where would we put a town center? And I like that it's on the questionnaire, and but town centers don't just happen, I don't believe. I mean, town centers happen in the Commonwealth through our surrounding towns a long time ago. And I don't know how you just say, okay, we're going to put a town center here without, and I know this is a great start. That's what the master plan is all about. And everybody having their input. And, we talked about everybody's input in different issues, not just the, town center. But that's an interesting subject for me, because it's very difficult to say, okay, we're going to put a town center here and make it grow. I know the new facility we talked about with the police and fire would be a huge start to that. But I just don't know if that would work in what we perceive to be the town center now because of the lack of space.
So, I mean, one of the things that you can do as a community, and don't mind my dogs. Everybody lives with dogs nowadays, right? Right. They were just under my feet. Yeah.
If you notice me getting up and down, it's to let the dog out and the dog's back in again. So I understand.
Yeah. So one of the things that a community can do to encourage, the development of a town center, and Gary, you're right, it doesn't happen overnight, but to allow for perhaps overlay zoning, which would encourage, or perhaps encourage new development that would currently not be allowed within that area. So for example, in that location, having the schools nearby, having the town hall just down the street, it may not be just isolated to the intersection itself, but it could, branch off of that. But currently with the Residence A, and John, I'll have to double check on this. You mentioned that in Residence A, you could do commercial within existing buildings. I thought that was residential D, but
No, I can show you a residential A.
okay.
Like as I said, barber shops, beauty parlors, small businesses under 2,000 square feet, or no
Okay.
more than 2,000 square feet.
Okay. So those types of things can be clustered around, that type of intersection and support the residents that are living nearby. But again, all ideas, as Gary mentioned, all ideas are on the table at this point.
Yeah, this is Martha Brewer. I just had a quick question. This is a great map, and I intend to go in later. But is the proposed commuter rail reflected in any of the data or the maps? Because I think that will have an impact, and I don't know that I haven't kept up on the time frame, but I know it's in the works.
Yes. It's not displayed on all of the maps. I do believe it's displayed on the transportation map. And the data is challenging because there isn't necessarily a time frame for when that might come online. But it is a valid point, and it's a project worth noting on the map. And on this map, we've highlighted several of the ideas along that Raynham Park location. In addition to that is the whole idea of, well, what happens if the train, ultimately never comes, right? And so there's, as we mentioned in the first meeting, it's two planning efforts. One, plan for South Coast Rail and the impacts that that might have. And two, plan for no South Coast Rail and the impacts that that might have. And so it's a challenge for certain. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I'm just not, I've looked at the map so many times, but I can't in my head overlay it with your maps. So I have an idea where it's supposed to go, but it's not a visual that would, I could automatically put on top of these. So
And you're referring to this map in itself.
this map and the others you were showing, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Excuse me, you are aware where it would run if we had the South Coast Rail come through town? Are you aware, Martha, my question is to Martha, do you know where it would, do you know the path of the South?
I know, yeah, I've seen it a couple different ways. And I know what's been proposed, the last version of it, where it goes over 138 and
Behind, yeah, and then behind the
yeah, so
Central
I
Oil.
have an idea, but if it was included in the map, particularly as you're talking about things like town centers and recreation, and your points, it's a good point. It may never happen. So do you plan around it if it never happens, or do you? But then if it does happen and your plans didn't, take it into account, it might be counterproductive. So I just thought the more information available as in these great tools probably would make it easier.
We'll see if we can't get it added to this map. We're using a third party for collection of points, so we'll see if we can have that that information added. Anybody else have anything burning? Again, the whole idea of the questions that are on the slide here. So, for example, if you were thinking about business growth in town, where would you like to see that happen? Are there particular areas in town?
I know in the chat, Martha, you had mentioned earlier, you were inquiring about some preservation areas that if they haven't already been identified, is this an opportunity to kind of talk about them? And like I said, the master plan is definitely a starting point. So were you thinking of any areas in particular when you asked that question?
Yeah, actually, the area right behind me on off of Britain Street, that's wetland, and your map has it as institutional. It's so if you go a little further, no, it's the other way. Nope.
North?
No, to the west, And then this map doesn't show it, but behind Britain Street is that whole area that's wetland and forest. And it wasn't in the protected areas, but it's, the big issue we have is the trash and the ATVers back there. So, so I didn't know if it wasn't protected because there's other plans for it, or if there's a way to include addressing some of the issues we have back there.
And you noted that it was shown as institutional.
Yes, in one of your other maps.
Let's see if we can get to
Yeah,
that.
no, yeah, that one.
Okay.
So it's that blue area in the middle. Yeah, right.
Just going to zoom in.
Yeah.
So you're referring to this area here?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's not listed as one of the protected. I don't remember any of the process for defining those. So could have happened way before my time, but.
Yeah, usually the protection areas were perhaps just areas where you had significant habitat, wetlands, there were water resources that folks wanted to protect. again, that whole initiative started back in 2008, and I was part of that at a different agency, and at the time we just had paper maps and people with markers and just literally circling things on maps. And as I mentioned, in 2013, that sort of refined itself, tried to tie it to the actual habitat area or parcels. So we can, I'll do a quick scan here and see. Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So in the
Not included as a.
okay, we'll note that. Let's do some deeper dive on that one.
I know at one point, the South Coast Rail had considered running back there. There's part of the railway goes back there. So I think that was still a one route option, but because it goes right into Taunton, my understanding is they're no longer considering that route because of the issue. So
Yeah, I mean it's complicated, as are many things nowadays. So South Coast Rail currently, they're building what's known as Phase 2,
right.
and that compromise came to fruition. Geez, I think that was 2017.
Yeah.
So our understanding is that they are still planning and designing for the alternative that comes through Raynham and through the Hockomock Swamp. The question really becomes, because there's two main problems with that particular project. Is one, it would, according to the permit that they got from the federal government, they would need to do electrified service. And as anyone knows, with commuter rail, nowhere else is there electrification. So there's not the infrastructure set up to support that kind of project. So there would have to be some sort of compromise to include diesel that would go through the swamp and all the way down along that route. And then, of course, there's the cost. There was, I think the last quote was a couple of $2 billion with a B. So there's certainly a mountain to climb, if you will, for that one. So
totally understand. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, may not be in our lifetime. So.
May is not the correct word. Definitely is the correct word. I mean, the whole project, or the talk of the project, been going on since the middle 80s. And it's only recently, in the past few years, that they've actually started building something.
Yeah, and the timing probably couldn't be worse, obviously, with the coronavirus.
Exactly.
So.
And the other thing is, you would have to take over the town of Stoughton by martial law to get the train to go through it, because they are adamant they want no part of that South Coast Rail.
Yeah.
Well, I brought that up in part because I wondered if during the protected conversations, that area I noted wasn't protected because they thought the railway was going to go through there or something. I don't know. But.
Great. So I'm not gonna put the dot on the map for you, because I encourage, if you're willing to come back and do it yourself and then explore the remainder of town too.
Yeah, be happy to.
How about anyone else? How about, are there areas that you see on the map that, while you've explored it, perhaps, that you may say agree with? There's areas along, or actually one of the comments that came up from a previous a commenter was the idea of open space along this area. Apparently, there's been a number of cluster subdivisions that have been put in this area where they've preserved open space. And so for those of you who don't know what cluster developments are, it's, a typical subdivision would occupy, all of the parcels. It would be fully built out. But in a cluster, it's basically you bring all those houses closer together. And by doing so, you preserve open space in perpetuity, so forever. And so because there's been a number of them up in this area, there appears to be this opportunity basically to create walking trails within that open space and you know, create this nice sort of area. So if you have comments that, you know, you might agree with that, here's the dot right on the map, right by the interchange. You can, like I said, click on it, either agree, perhaps leave a comment.
And maybe more generally, Jed, I know the survey, a lot of people said they were interested in seeing more recreation areas or uses around town. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, I think that'd be really insightful and give some texture to that response of the survey, especially because, you know, we can say generally more recreation, but what does that really mean? You know, it's harder to implement without having those types of specifics.
Actually, if I may, that was another area that I was surprised at, because myself, I think we have an awful lot of recreation area. I mean, the King Philip Street, the soccer fields, and there's baseball, softball fields there, tennis courts, and there are a number of baseball fields behind the elementary and the middle, and not the middle school, but the elementary school, although the middle school does have a lot of recreation area as well. So I was surprised that people thought we needed more of it. I mean, we have one of the finest soccer complexes in the state. Years ago, when my son played, I traveled to a lot of different towns in the area, and by far, we had the most superior soccer facilities. So I was surprised at that comment as well. But hey, I guess, you know, everyone has their own perspective on things, and I guess the more space, the better. It's difficult to find a place to put it. And by the way, the King Philip area, the Borden Colony area, is protected. It can only be used for recreation and farms. So it's not going away anytime soon.
For some of those less obvious areas, like, you know, the soccer fields, I'm sure everyone's very familiar with those. Do you think it has something to do with how they're not marketed, but how people find them? Like, are they well known, or do you have to be like a resident for, like, you know, a generations type of thing to know this is the walking trail to go to, or can you easily find them?
Hi, this is Tim McRae, the Park and Rec Director.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? As John was saying, you know, those areas that we have for boarding colony and also like the baseball fields down at the schools, they're very well known. And Mr. Texer is correct that, you know, people can go to boarding colony and walk through the Pine Grove, walk through the back areas. You know, we're just running out of space to put these things we want, you know, unless we talk about, you know, converting a field to turf or something like that. We're kind of limiting, you know, where we're at. I mean, I would love to have more space for more programs, things like that, but the space issue is the biggest thing for us.
And Tim, might I add, one of the options that we may have, and you and I have talked about this before, since you've been in this job, when we looked when the whole issue of the Animal Rescue League facility, you know, the Borden Colony area is huge. It's absolutely huge. If anyone has passed through there and you see all the flowers that are grown there during the summer for the Labor Day usage, I was amazed to learn that they have over 600,000 pots there during the season. It's a huge area. You can't even see most of it from King Philip Street, or much of it. One of the things we might consider to give you more recreational area is the state controls what the percentages are between farm and recreation in that area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they made the law, they can change the law. You petition them and say, hey, we want to take another, I don't know what the number is, 5 acres, 10 acres, and make it recreational. There's certainly room there. And besides the flowers that are grown there, if you look at the area behind, and Tim, you correct me if I'm wrong, the area behind the soccer fields is not used at all. At one time, it was all farmed, but nobody's been using it now for decades, as far as I can remember. Tim, you agree?
Right now, it is being used. It is leased, that area. Some people, you know, for for hay, for farming.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's gotta be hay then, yeah.
Now that area is under lease for at least another 4 years off the top of my head.
My point being that there's a place where there's potential for more recreational, if you would. And it keeps a lot of recreational areas all in the same location. You know, it'd be very easy to put a road into that area to open up more fields of whatever type, baseball, softball, and so forth.
Is this the general area that you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
It's more on the, looking at it to the left is the recreational area.
Right.
That side right there. And then all behind it is agricultural. On the other side, we also have agricultural, but that is used for farming, also leased out with other organizations.
So this is the area that is leased?
Yes, and also behind the green area, that's the recreational area, behind there is leased as well.
This area right in here?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is the comment that I put down here that hopefully I get to all right. I think 3 times the charm. We'll go back in there and make sure. I basically put more space here would be helpful for offering other programs or sports.
I know, I know you have another workshop on the recreation.
We do.
Things, but one of the challenges we have with that area I mentioned before was ATVers who say we don't have any space to, you know, dirt bikers, those kind of things. Tim, I don't know if that's a recreational thing that could be developed so people who want to do that. I mean, I've looked for them for places they can go, and they all complain there's nothing in Raynham that they can go to. But in the meantime, so they go wherever they just trespass wherever they want because
And they're not supposed to be out there. I mean,
no,
that's
I understand that, but I feel bad for the cops and the environmental police who you end up calling and, you know, the bonfire. So I think there's an ATV park up in Brockton. I don't even know if that's something the town would consider and the liability issues and the things like that. But it's such a, you know, you see the ATVers all over the place. So I just don't know if that's ever been discussed as a potential thing to be developed. So.
I think you've hit it on the head with the liability issues. That's what you got to worry about with those type of things. What if someone gets hurt on town property? Who's liable? You know, and you talk about, well, we'll have them sign waivers. That's a big topic. Well, we'll sign waivers. You know what? As long as there's a smart lawyer out there somewhere, he'll find a way around the waivers, and the town will be liable for it. And it's an expensive proposition.
No, I understand. It seems like there's a huge demand for it from people truck in to go back there illegally. And I know, I just feel bad that the cops have to deal with it when there's other things they should, or the environmental police, and there's other things
There used to be a place for them on King Philip Street, what they refer to as the pit.
Yeah.
It's now a beautiful housing development. It doesn't exist anymore, but they did used to travel in there quite a bit.
Yeah. So anyway, I know there's a whole workshop on recreation, so maybe that's more appropriate for that conversation, but just brought it up. So.
Yeah, I'm glad, Martha, that you brought that up because although we do have a separate workshop that's dedicated to that subject, all of these workshops are, we take comments about everything. So don't ever feel like, oh, I'll save it for that workshop. Just throw it at us. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to catch everything and try to, develop these goals and strategies for you no matter when we hear it.
I guess the overlay is the land use that you would need for something like that. So.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll get back to the in-person, model that we're so accustomed to, putting maps on tables and interacting in small groups. God willing, we're we're headed in that direction. But I just want to hit upon that ATV comment, because you're right, Martha and John. Those are activities that I hear as a resident of my town every weekend. I hear it all over the place, and it's clearly a demand from a population that wants to use them. And so I'm curious, John, back in the day when you referenced the pit, what that was that a municipally owned parcel of land, or was that a privately held thing that people just used?
I'm not sure who owned it, but people just use it. I mean, it wasn't designated for that purpose. It would just happen to be again, I guess the name of the pit came from the fact that they had moved a lot of gravel and dirt out of there. So it was a very hilly and crevices and so forth, and it was ideal for that. I don't know how happy the neighbors in that area were with the noise, because as you know, dirt bikes are typically very noisy. But I'm not sure who. I think it was privately owned. Dave, you might know.
If you're talking about the one on King Philip Street, I'm not sure. I know when I was younger, Lope's pit was a big attraction, and unfortunately it still is. And that's part of the problem, where they're coming through on the railroad bed to get to that pit. And it's a never ending battle. And obviously we can't chase them.
And didn't we have a fatality there, crossing 138 on the railroad bed a few years back on a dirt bike? A young man was killed there.
We had someone that had their leg severed, but there has been fatality.
I think if you're going to study how to interact with the recreational ATV use, you'd want to study what the towns in Vermont and New Hampshire do. That do it with bike registrations, and the ATV clubs up there are very active in mapping trails that are approved for ATV use. A lot of that they've been doing for years, and you'd have to look at how they do it, because they do it pretty good.
Yeah, that's definitely really important. I know one of the deliverables of the master plan itself is we not only, have this goal in mind, but we give you the strategies. And as a part of that is also looking at, if it's something that's new to town, what have other places done? Who are those contacts that we should be talking to in order to move some type of project like this forward that would be completely new, kind of uncharted territory for Raynham especially. But just because, we don't know what the liability would look like, it shouldn't, preclude us from considering it, especially if there is demand for it.
Well, I think it would be safer for everybody if there was a way to, and I'm glad to hear other people talk about it, because I know it's not just a Raynham issue. I know the people back there are coming from Taunton and other places to come here to do that. But that was a great, Gary, thank you for that suggestion. And Elizabeth, if there are other areas or communities that have addressed this successfully, it would be great to know that as we sort of wrestle with it here.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize what a very accommodating group the environmental police can be. If there was more of these guys out there using ATVs for recreation that would just follow the rules and register their bikes and not go on land that they're not allowed to go on, everybody get along a lot better. But unfortunately, there's just a large group of people using ATVs that don't follow those simple rules that the environmental police right here in our own community would agree with. If they just obey the rules, they could coexist with the communities.
Wow.
How about zoning? Has anyone, ever spent some time with the current zoning and understand it? And, are there things that, if you could change things for a day, perhaps changing allowed uses or districts, sizing of districts? Is there anything, burning in your minds?
Well, if I may, it's nothing that I would like to see changed, but if anyone in town, I'm sure is aware of the fact that for many years now, there's been a group who's been trying to change the zoning on Route 138 to make it a multiple overlay district, multi-use overlay district. But there's been a much bigger group who's opposed to that, because that would require, at least in my mind, and I've been part of that group opposing to it, because what it would entail is tearing down residential homes, which is complete opposite of what we're looking to do in town. And that's all along the Route 138 corridor, roughly from the town line all the way up to Britton Street area, that particular area. So that's one thing I know, and I think at the first master planning committee meeting, one of the members mentioned that it was a not in my backyard type of thing. Well, that isn't the case at all. It's in fact a real concern not to tear down all those homes there. I think and this is something, I used to be on the planning board, so I was a Serpent commissioner. And one of the things that came up in a number of the presentations that we had from the state was that the governor was looking to add like 125,000 housing units in the state. Well, tearing down residential homes to put in a strip mall doesn't get you closer to that goal by any means, and so that's the only thing I can tell you about zoning, that's been going on. Other than that, we have a lot of wet areas in our town. Okay, this whole area of Massachusetts is a wet area. You'd be hard pressed to go to any town and not find a sump pump in 5 out of 6 homes. I mean, it's just the way the area is. So you've got a lot of wetlands that can't be used. There's a large parcel of land on Route 44 on the, east northern side of 44, way down past the car lots. It's like 70 acres. It's had a for sale sign on it now for at least 2 decades. And I inquired once when I was on the planning board, I asked Bob Iafredi, why is that not selling? I mean, you would think there are so many more car dealerships that could go in there. Well, I guess that's plagued because it's on the border to the river. It's plagued with a lot of wetlands. It's restrictive on what you could do there. So that's something that we really can't do anything about. Although, you are allowed, if you take up or invade wetlands, if you replace it somewhere else, you're allowed to do that. That's one of the things they're doing with the South Coast Rail now. I forget what the number was, and you folks from Serpent might know it better because that's where I got the data. They were taking X number of acres of wetland and replacing them. But that's an issue for our town.
Yeah, they typically enforce a certain ratio. So whatever you're, eating up, you have to replace. Typically, it's almost double. Yes, John, to your point, that speaks to this Route 44 East designation, and so I guess that's a great jumping off point. So what do folks sort of think about the Route 44 corridor in that area of town? Is it would you if you were, say, updating these priority areas again, which we've already identified as one of the potential strategies for the master plan, because again, they originally came out in 2008. They were updated in 2013. 5 years later, after 2013, is 2018. So you're behind in terms of making sure that these are the most up-to-date areas. Would that be an area that you would say, no way, Jose, I don't want that to be combined. I'd rather see that preserved? Anybody?
I don't want to do all the talking here tonight, folks. Help me out. Tim, come on. Stephen and Rachel, first of all, put your faces up and then chime in with us.
The other thing I'll add too, really quickly, oh, hi, Rachel, is that, we promised to keep you here for only an hour. And I'm just looking down, I see it's 7:13. I feel terrible. But I want to just make it clear, you know, Lizeth and I will stay for as long as you want, but at any point you want to leave and you want to go eat dinner, by all means, you know, no one's requiring you to stay. We just ask that you come back and put your dots on the map whenever it's convenient for you. It'll be open for probably the remainder of the month, collecting all this information. And again, we're going to be using it at the next workshop and the workshop after that. So we're, you know, building a big thing here. So.
I don't know that I really have much to say about the Route 44 area because I'm not that familiar with it and I don't live over there and I've only been here a few years, but I'd like to, I don't know, drive around over there and take a look at it. And then maybe I could make more educated. I feel bad being like, yeah, we should do X, Y, Z if I'm not the person who lives over there. I mean, I don't know what is over by the Taunton River, that green part. Is that like a park or something over there? But
Yeah, that's really a lot of just open land.
okay.
Yeah. So I believe, you know, Bob was mentioning.
That
Bob,
area there is being developed for 40B housing right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, actually, that was originally going to be an adult retirement community. And that wasn't approved by the planning board.
Right.
And supposedly there's going to be, or the owner wants to make it a 40B. He has yet to apply for a special permit because that's what's required for 40B. But yeah, as you can see, he's got the roads all cut in and so forth. But without the special permit, he can't start construction. That should be coming up before the Board of Appeals soon.
Yeah, Bob Iafredi mentioned that this area right in here, that 40B, I believe he said the proposal was for 138 units. And that's all south of Route 44. The area north of Route 44 is there's a lot of wetlands.
Yeah.
Now that isn't to say that, you know, adjoining properties can't be combined. Someone could purchase other nearby properties and then gain access to the land that's behind it. So, you know, there is definitely an opportunity back there, but obviously it's a significant lift.
The other area that's not utilized right now, and again, that came before me when I was on the planning board, is there's a large area between the Wendy's and Lowe's, I guess it is, that is all cleared now, as you can see. That was originally going to contain 5 buildings that would be office and maybe light assembly area. And that's the plan that came in and the plan that we approved. And then along came the developer and said, no, I want to put a 24-hour diesel repair and sales operation there. There was a lot of fight from and rightfully so, I think, from the residents who lived behind that, because who wants to live behind a 24-hour diesel repair shop? That company also has one up in the Northborough area that I visited, and I'll tell you, the smell of diesel was constant. It curled your hair. So fortunately, that guy backed off from that. And right now, it looks like, I think it's Amazon is using it to park their vans in there. I don't know how that works. I guess the drivers pull in there, park their car, and off with the van for the day. But it's not really being utilized, and that would be a good place. The original plan to put those buildings, office buildings. If you remember when we talked about north on 138 medical buildings and so forth, that would be a great place to put something like that. If you drove up Route 118 into West Bridgewater and Bridgewater and so forth, or East Bridgewater and Bridgewater, there's some massive medical centers along that route. That would be a great place to put it.
So John, can I put it on the map?
Sure, why not?
Okay. I'm going to do economic development, and I believe it's just across the street from Commerce Way. It's difficult without it.
Yes, it is.
Right here, yeah.
It is, and because that's one of the things that we asked about when he was doing the office development. Is there any way to put a light? But he couldn't make his driveway completely opposite Commerce Way because of, you ready for this? Wetlands, which was directly across. So he couldn't do it that way.
So what is the comment? Good place for more medical office?
Yeah, we have a few of them on 44. On the other side of 44, a little further down, there's a large medical complex in there. But you know, we talk about the aging population. Well, that's not just a Raynham thing. And the older the population gets, the more medical facilities you need. It's pretty basic.
Sure. Okay, I mean, I'm, like I said, Lizette and I are happy to stay, but by all means, you know, if the conversation's winding down, feel free to, you know, we'll close this out for this evening. If you have any questions, as Lizette mentioned at the beginning, you can email the project at raynhammp@gmail.com. You can text or call and leave a message on our line, which I do not have memorized at this point. Or you can, you know, come by the workshop page and drop a point on the map and you know, provide comments. So thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
if you see any of our Facebook posts, please feel free to share them. That gets a lot of traction if it comes from someone that people know and trust. So if you see me sharing the wiki map or the next save the date, please share it, and maybe that'll get us some more comments, some more variety. It doesn't all have to be in these types of meetings. We've gotten really valuable comments just from interacting with people on Facebook and sending them the links and telling them how to do it. We do have instructional videos in case people aren't too familiar with the technology as well. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you guys to reach out to us.
Okay, well, thank you. It's almost time for Jeopardy, so I'm going to leave the meeting now. I think we're just about done. One thing I will say is that I'm a little more hopeful. We have more people here tonight. You know, last meeting we had more non-Raynham residents than we had Raynham residents on it. So we've upped the number from 7 to this time. So we're progressing. Have a good evening, all.
Thank you so much for
Thank you so
coming.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.